It's Wednesday, September 10th, just following up on the SPY. It's midday right now. I thought I'd just follow up here on the daily chart. You can see after a kind of a gap up, exhaustion risk, we're a little red on the day, still way above the midpoint of the prior day. So the trend's still up, but market, like I said, is in a kind of a wait and see kind of mode with an economic, report coming out tomorrow. So not surprising to see it pausing up here, even though the trend is up and we're a little red. So, that's kind of the context in play. And I just thought this is a good example of how that context combined with the way I look at price action, the same way every single day, led you to an opportunity, but, still with some uncertainty. So in other words, if we look at the 15-minute chart, I'm always judging everything by that first 15-minute bar relative to the context, relative to the opening price action. So in this case, we did have a move above the first bar high. Not surprised that that took out that pre-market high as liquidity right there, and then immediately paused. It could have continued higher, but to see the pause was not surprising. And then once we kind of probed back into the first bar range in this overall environment, I discussed how I bought puts here and, anticipated instead of momentum to the upside, we would probably take out a little liquidity. And that's kind of a combination of A, the way market logic unfolds at exhaustion risk, and B, how opening price action in this case, relative to how it formed, didn't want to immediately have a strong push up, and instead coming back through here was likely to move a little lower. And this is a good example of just how broadening formations occur all the time in the market. And that's why if you don't get momentum and you have certain price activity form, anticipate maybe making higher highs and lower lows in the very short run. And that's exactly what happened. I shot a video here once it was getting to the low of the day. That's an inflection point now, because that's a liquidity area. So the question is, are you going to, in an overall uptrend, come strongly down? That's uncertain. Or is it going to be, a reversal area? You don't know that for sure either. And it's, if nothing else, a logical pause area. So you can see the pause happened, and that's not surprising. And then ultimately we came up just for a bar. It had a red reversal. So again, we now get to see, does that get to test the low of the day? And that's what I'm always looking for on secondary trades. In this case, it might do it, but we're still in an overall uptrend. So it's not as if, you're anticipating a significant follow through from here, although anything's possible. So this is kind of an example of how structure unfolds relative to the context and some of the opportunities. I discussed how I bought some puts early on. I bought those 658 puts at 483. They reached a high of 575 on that first push down. They're now at 560. So, there was a little pause here. Now we get to see what happens. And again, you're not really anticipating a strong reversal day to the downside, but if it should end that way with a big strong red bar, you then expect a little follow through tomorrow. If we just kind of stay neutral here, it's kind of still tricky in terms of there's no actionable signal to the upside. It's more momentum at that point, and we get to see if we open above the midpoint of this bar tomorrow and head higher, or is it still going to pull back and maybe fill in this gap even in an overall uptrend. So this is a tricky week in terms of, you're at all-time highs, we're having a little pause, and it's not easy trading. But I just thought I'd follow up on what developed here once it made this was the high probability play to me that it would at least take out the lows of the day. Once it did that, not surprised to see an inflection point. And if you look at the way I judge price action, above the midpoint of the prior day, but taking out that first target, that could be a reversal area at best, and at worst, it's a pause area, and it's, less likely that you're going to have a strong push down. But it was possible, since there's kind of a room to the top of the range here, that we could have got at least a few more red bars before trying to hold in here. So anyway, just thought I'd follow that up. That's what's happening midday on the SPY. I don't think it's, clear actionable signals going forward here. The trend is up in the big picture. We're at a little exhaustion risk, and opening price action in this case wanted to probe lower before possibly resuming higher at some point down the road.